Wow. Welcome everybody once again. We did have monitors in the parking lot. If you tried to start your car after lunch, kaboom. We're on to you. What a good time. I'm here to have a good time, and the more I talk, the less time there is for Eitan and Joel, so I'm going to try to be brief. I just can't be totally brief. I want to acknowledge the brisket we just enjoyed. Where's my maestro? In the corner, Stephen Henchen. Smoking! Wow. I don't know how they got you into Proverbs 31. Many have done well. We're not going to go there. We already went there. And this table was built years ago. How many years ago was it? Where's Bob Ritter? He's probably helping in the dining room. This is engraved with the Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, from Deuteronomy 6:4. And you turn it around, and it says something different. You don't usually get to see this side. There we go. Am I in the middle, Keith? Thumbs up. Whose Hebrew is good enough to read this one? V'zod HaTorah. This is the Torah. Asher Sam Moshe, that Moses placed lifnei, before Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, al pi Adonai, on the mouth of the Lord, biad Moshe, from the arm of Moses. It's also scriptural. Book of Numbers. Thank you. No one corrected me. I must be right. But let's see. We got a pair of Israelis here. How wonderful. You know, I told most of you individually, but I want to tell you collectively how honored I am that you came to be here today. That you clicked on the yes, I will attend button to your invitation, and you registered to be with us. I know that it's not easy to be any place, and there are temptations and priorities that kept this crowd from being twice as good, but you are the survivors. And the survivors in Hebrew is the same word as remnant. You are the righteous remnant. And thank you for being here today. We're honored. You had to say no to a lot of other invitations to say yes to this one. There's Bob, who made this table. He crafted the wrought iron by himself, from hand, from scratch. What kind of iron do you call that? Now I'm the straight man. And I want to acknowledge that I'm taking the reins here, but Keith Henchen is the congregational leader at Shomer. It doesn't look like it because I'm doing the emceeing today, but Keith and I changed seats last August, and he became the younger leader and I became the older leader. I'm still becoming, but we're into it. You don't use older anymore. No, we don't say older? Is that out of style? You say mature. Mature. Except I haven't become mature. I also want to acknowledge the folks from Shomer who came to serve. They're all, well, some of them are seated here, and some of them are in the other sanctuary, in the other dining hall. especially the children are cleaning up after lunch, and that's such a pleasure to have children with a heart to serve. May they be blessed in their service. And having children is what we're here to talk about eventually. I'm going to take just a moment because I find that it's important. Some of you already know Eitan, but many of you don't. And I'm going to introduce Eitan. Eitan is going to introduce Joel. Eitan and I met going close to 40 years ago. It's probably 38 years ago at least. Oh, wow. That's a long time. And we moved to Israel separately in 1992 without really a strong connection to each other. My aliyah to Israel didn't last, but his did. And he is a survivor in many ways since 1992 in Israel, in the land. And I'm going to ask him to bring a piece of his testimony, and you'll know a lot more about him when he tells us his story. But I want to say enough that you will believe what he says to you, and yet not too much that it takes his time. So trust me that he is one of my primary fathers in the faith, that I would trust him in every way with my life. And I want to say this. One of the things we're going to talk about eventually is supporting some of the ministries that Eitan has dedicated his life to, especially regarding the youth, the Messianic youth of Israel. And I want to say this while I have the bully pulpit. There are a lot of well-funded ministries that get a lot of airtime and a lot of publicity. And a lot of times when I talk to pastors and Christians about support for Israel, here's what I hear. It's okay. I got a guy. I got a guy in Israel. I support the guy in Israel. And who's the guy? What do you know about him? What do you know about the fruit that they're producing in Israel? I'm not going to put any ministry down, but I'm going to tell you that when I introduce you to Eitan and Joel, these are guys with feet on the ground, faces in front of faces, dealing with young people and their struggles, dealing with the Israeli youth as they get off to the army and as they come out of the army, and the temptations that being in the army presents to a believer is challenging because you're asked to follow orders from non-believers. And those orders don't necessarily always coincide with your faith, but you're in the army. You have to deal with that. So, Eitan, I'm not going to take any more of your time. Do you think they're ready to listen to you?
I hope so.
Okay, come. This will surprise Joel. I don't know if you heard this before, but I like to call Eitan my Hamoudi. That didn't mean a thing to those of you that don't speak Hebrew. Well, how would you translate Hamoudi? Darling?
Yeah, cutie.
You wouldn't even try? I love you, man.
Love you too.
Blessings.
Well, I'm overcome with gratitude to be here for Michael and Jan and Keith and Cammie's hospitality. It's just, it's really something when somebody takes you out to lunch, but when somebody invites another 80 people, you know, to join in and to hear about your life, it's really humbling. It's very moving. Thank you for taking the time. I also appreciate all y'all who were so much a part of the production. Some of you I recognize from meeting you earlier. Well, my story begins in Chicago, Illinois in 1948, and I think most of you will recognize that year as being pretty significant in history because that's the year that Israel was officially reborn after being out of the land almost 2,000 years and actually not in governmental control more than that. I was born of a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father. My father's people were Bulgarian immigrants, and my mother's people, German Jewish immigrants. So I find it interesting that I followed in their footsteps also to be an immigrant, though mine was in Israel. As I grew up in the 50s and 60s, I had a lot of questions. Where's the world going? Is there going to be a World War III? What about racial inequality? There were just some things that to me didn't quite add up to what I was learning of, solid, basic American values. And that created a lot of questions, and it created really a search. And in that search, I cycled through just about every philosophy, every religion, and then ultimately a number of different drugs, music styles, et cetera, that were happening in the mid-60s. Some of you may have seen the Jesus Revolution movie. It was during that time. And I won a bride. I didn't enter a raffle, but God sent my bride to me all the way from Philadelphia. I was living at the time in California. We took our honeymoon in a cave. I don't see too many young folks here who are getting ready to get married, but I always tell the guys, if you can get a gal that's willing to have her honeymoon in a cave, she will never leave you. And she hasn't left me for 54 years. That's really a wonderful situation. 4 married children, all living in Israel, who have given us 11 grandchildren. What happened when we got to the mountains of New Mexico was that we thought that we could establish a purity of life. I entered into a very close relationship with nature. Part of that was unavoidable, living without electricity or indoor plumbing, and also being a suburban California boy, learning how to wrestle vegetables out of the ground. It took several years. But by around the 4-year mark, I had learned to do that, and we were eating. We weren't starving. But at that point, a close friend was murdered by a total stranger in an absolutely senseless act. And that tragedy brought me absolutely, literally to my knees. I had no idea what end was up. Did my friend have a soul that continued? Is there a God? What happens after you die? My parents had taught me that that's it, oblivion. You don't exist anymore. I used to cry myself to sleep. So at that point, I'm almost literally shaking my hands at heaven, saying, what's the deal here? I need some answers. Not more than about 2 weeks later, some of these same people, I would call them Jesus people, these guys happened to be from the East Coast. It turned out God had sent them all the way from New Jersey to New Mexico. And here I can say that because you know the geography. All the way up to our remote cabin, which was about 9 miles from pavement, to give us the gospel. And I listened. And at the time, I thought Jesus was pretty cool, he's one of the big three. There's Jesus, there's Buddha, there's Muhammad. These guys are kind of like, they really knew how to do it. I want to know how to do it. I never thought that somebody needed to die for me on the cross. I was quite arrogant about that. Jewish, hippie, intellectual. And as they were talking, I saw him. I didn't see the room anymore. All I was looking at was a man. His arms were stretched out like this. And I knew exactly who that was. Don't ask me how, it just seemed obvious. And his eyes gripped my eyes. He couldn't speak because he was in the agony of crucifixion. But what he said through his eyes was, I see what you are aiming for, what you're searching for, and you haven't found it, and you will never find it out of your own effort, but I'm hanging here for you. I'm what you have always longed for. I am the key to purity. I am bearing all of your failure to be pure. I'm bearing everything about you that has not measured up to even your own standards. And I love you despite your failure. I do not accuse you, but I call you to believe in me. And at that point, I absolutely knew that I had found what I had always been looking for. I was 24 years old. I came out of that vision. The next thing I heard from these guys was, are you ready to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior? They didn't know I just had a vision of him. And so I knelt down together with my farming buddy. Man, some of you may know this name. Russ Resnick became a major leader in the modern Messianic Jewish movement, has written a number of books. We were spiritual twins, accepted the Lord. It was October of 1972, over 50 years ago. And God took my heart, and he hasn't let go, and I haven't let go of him. What happened was we then, 2 years later, moved down out of the mountains to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I started in a totally unknown evening Bible school because I had been trying to change the world through all other methods, but I knew now this really is the answer. This is what changes people's hearts. This is what will bring personal and larger extended peace. As I studied, I was working during the day because I had a wife and 2 children I had to support. But none of the teachers, they were wonderful men and women of God, none of the teachers understood the connection of the covenants. Nobody was saying, well, there's this earlier part, and then there's this second part, and here's how they connect. I just thought, well, seems like 2 very different versions of God and of the story. One day I was reading the account of the Last Supper, and all of a sudden, don't ask me why I was so slow, it just took me a long time, I realized what that meal was. And you all know what that was. It was Passover. I said, oh my goodness. Jesus is using the Passover. First of all, he's celebrating it with his disciples. So he's obviously still Jewish. They're still Jewish. They're still doing the thing that Moses gave them 1,400 years earlier. And he's raising it to this whole new level, saying, this is ultimate deliverance from slavery. My body and my blood are given for you. And yet it was that commemoration of the deliverance from Egypt. At that moment, the Lord put my life back together again. Now I knew that there was meaning to be Jewish. I knew that somehow God's dealings with the Jewish people and his commitment to the Jewish people was not just a temporary thing that ended with the New Testament. I knew that being born Jewish didn't make me better than anybody else on the whole planet, but I also knew that it was part of fulfilling God's ultimate promises. And so Connie's Jewish on both sides, began to celebrate the feasts of the Bible, the feasts of the Lord. And we actually started with Passover. And each time we came to another feast, we saw the messianic significance. We saw the historic and prophetic significance in Israel. And as we began to learn, we gained a sense that our destiny would be in Israel. We were serving in a messianic congregation. That's when I met Michael back in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. We were serving in partner congregations. And the desire to move to Israel began to gain momentum. And as I met a few people that were serving in Israel, I used to do a radio program, interview radio program we called Gates of Zion. I saw that this was what God wanted. In fact, I'd speak to a few Israelis and say, yeah, I'm thinking of doing this. I want to do this. And they all would say, yeah, Joel does it. Yeah, sure. Give me a timetable. And I actually said, I believe that I'll be here within 5 years. That was 1987 during my first trip. And 5 years later, we landed in Israel after I had done some messianic pastoring. And we arrived. For all I knew, we would pick oranges. I wasn't thinking, I was going to start some big ministry. But the Lord unfolded an amazing story in which we wound up planting a congregation in the Haifa area, which 2 years after we started it was firebombed, which was really a fascinating experience to go through because it caused us to understand that there was something at stake. Why is the enemy going to push our fellow Jews to firebomb our facility if there's not something of a spiritual warfare and of a pretty profound meaning to the fact that we are promoting Yeshua as the Messiah of Israel and worshiping him in a Jewish way? Well, we began to see the need for congregations, and the Lord gave me spiritual sons and daughters. And I really relate to Michael passing the baton to Keith here because there is nothing so rewarding as handing that baton off to the next generation. And I want to encourage you here in this room. This is just a parenthesis. This is not a part of my story. I just feel the Holy Spirit wants me to encourage you, you spiritual moms and dads, because younger people need examples. They need mentors. They need coaches. They need people who will invest in them and develop a personal relationship and shepherd and usher them into their calling. So releasing these young people into planting congregations in northern Israel was an amazing experience. But as I was doing so, I was noticing a gap, both in our own congregation and elsewhere. And the gap had to do with the teenagers, had to do with the youth. And so some 22 years ago, God, in his craziness, sorry, Lord, assigned a relatively new immigrant, not a native Israeli, stumbling through the Hebrew language, which I used exclusively in ministry. I wasn't willing to default to English, to take the need of young people and to see camps, biblically oriented camps with worship and with recreation and with fellowship, starting out very clumsily and very just, with what we could put together from some help from some people in the States. And it was actually during those years, I had known Joel since he was 4 years old. We were in the same congregation in Haifa. But it was during those years that Joel and other young people were beginning to come through these camps and be impacted. He's going to tell you some of his story and what happened in his life. But I want to say that something is very apparent to me in history. And having been a revolutionary in the 60s, I really understand this. Revolutions, serious societal change, happens from the passion of young people being willing to take to the streets, being willing to take chances, being willing to push against the status quo. And this is a spiritual revolution. Did you know that Messianic Judaism is a spiritual revolution? Did you know that Jewish and Gentile people sitting in a room like this with Messianic leadership, with some guy coming up here and telling you what it says in Hebrew on this table? This is a revolution. This is the first time in history that there has been a fully united body of believers that consists of Jewish people following Jesus and Gentile people following Jesus, walking together as one without minimizing the identity of either. We are on the way to the return of the Messiah. This has to happen for Jesus to come back. And that's one of the things that so energizes us and brings us together. Well, I saw Joel, I saw other young people, and I began to realize that this is what I want to give myself to. I've been so rewarded to plant congregations, but in terms of changing the atmosphere of Israel, in terms of making Yeshua known, it has to be the young people who are in the warp and the woof of the society, who are serving in the army, who are moving into higher education and into jobs and creating families. That's where this has to go in order for Israel to be impacted. Now, of course, we're praying. I hope that you are praying with us for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit that the prophet Joel speaks about, because that power is essential. It's not just going to be training young people, but it's also training them to depend on the Spirit. And so what we saw was a need for a concerted effort to equip teenagers and then to equip young adults. And so I want to introduce Joel to you now and let you feel the passion, the calling. I will speak of his gifting because he won't. Joel has such a variety of capabilities that I didn't even know until we started working together. He is the executive director of this ministry that we're sharing with you, Fields of Wheat. I'm the old guy that's, that's cheering him on from behind and doing some of the communication and building bridges. And by the way, if I hope that I will be standing in this room again, but if I never am, and you see that Joel is here, this is the connection. And what it says at the end of the Hebrew scriptures, the prophets, you're familiar with it in Malachi, that God is going to transfer the heart of the fathers to the sons and the heart of the sons to the fathers. That's what this relationship is about. And so I want Joel to come and to share his life with you so that you can know him, and for us to really be able to have something organic. And I really love the emphasis that Michael has given to this day. We are not interested in a one-time event. We really desire and are praying for long-term relationships. And any questions that you have, we are going to have a question and answer session after we finish the presentation. There's also going to be a video that Joel will introduce to you. So Joel Jelski, my son in the faith, of whom I'm very proud.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here with you guys. I have one question. Do y'all say y'all here in Tennessee? Yeah, okay. I thought it was just a Texas thing for some reason. All right. Well, my name is Joel. I'm 34 years old, married, and I have two sons. One of them is 7 and one is 1 year old, and they're back at home in Israel. I want to share with you quickly a little bit about my testimony and how I came to work with Eitan and what it is that we do today as a ministry. But if somebody needs to leave because of time reasons, I want to make sure I say this ahead of time. There's brochures outside. You can grab a brochure. It has some of our information on there, my email. And if you say, oh man, I want to hear some more and I can't stay, feel free to contact us, all right? And we want to be in touch with you, especially if you're interested more in what we do, but you can't stay here to talk to us afterwards. Please get in touch with us. That's the first thing. Also, Eitan has some things that he's selling out there, some of the books that he's written, and so feel free afterwards to go out there and see that. But our vision, our heart in Fields of Wheat is to equip the next generation. That's what we're called to do. And our heart is to equip the next generation, Jews and Arabs together. And that's something the Lord put on my heart many years ago. I want to share with you a little bit about how I came to the faith. I was living in the States at the time. I was living in Dallas. I was a 17-year-old. I had lived in Dallas from age 12 to 17. And in January of 2006, I was in high school, 11th grade, and I was empty. I was not walking with the Lord, really. I came from a believing family. My parents were in Bible school. I knew all the stuff you need to know, as a kid growing up in a Christian family or a believing family. I knew it all. Like, I knew the Bible. I had no relationship with God, though, that I would say. I could answer all the questions right. That's what you could say. I could answer all the questions right, but I really didn't have a relationship with God. And so I was really empty. And in January of 2006, a few of the girls in my 11th grade that were passionate for the Lord invited me to go to a youth camp. And I don't know why. It's people I don't hang out with. We grew up in the same grades together, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, so I'd known them for a long time. But they weren't the people I hung out with. They weren't my friends. But as soon as they invited me to this youth conference, I said yes. Just immediately I said yes. I knew that's exactly where I needed to go. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew I needed to go there because I was hungry for something real. And I went to this youth conference. It was called the Joel Conference, ironically. And yeah. And it wasn't large, wasn't a well-known conference. I don't even think it exists anymore. It was like 70 teenagers there. And in one of the worship sessions, the Lord met me in a very powerful way. And as we were singing a worship song, I just heard the Lord's voice say, it wasn't something really he said even. It was the words that we were singing were the answer that God was giving to my heart about all the questions I had. And it was in that worship song as we were worshiping him, and the words were, I'm in love with God, God's in love with me, this is who I am, and this is who I'll be, and that settles it. It's a Misty Edwards song. I didn't even know who she was at the time. And those words penetrated my heart. And in that moment, as I was singing those words, I said, okay, Lord, my life is yours. I surrendered my life to the Lord. And I don't call that a salvation experience because I already believed Jesus. I just didn't have a relationship with him. But that was the moment that my life was surrendered to the Lord. That's when my life became his. I say that to say that this is one of the reasons that I believe in what we do. What we do each year is we organize and we host 3 youth camps a year. And we host about 120 teenagers at each camp. And we have about 40 staff and volunteers, young adults who serve both as administration, logistics, but most of them serve as counselors. And many of those young adults are people who grew up as teenagers in our camps, were deeply impacted, and they come back as young adults to serve the teenagers as counselors. They each lead a small group every day, and they're responsible for personally investing and pouring into the teenagers in their small groups. So we host these camps 3 times a year. We have one coming up in August. It's 5 days long. The other ones are 4 days each. The reason I believe in what we do is because I gave my life to the Lord in a camp. And these camps present opportunities for these teenagers to encounter God. And all it takes is one moment that can transform your life forever. When I gave my life to the Lord that weekend, I went back to school and I was on fire. And I've been walking with the Lord since. And when I left the U.S. a month later in February of 2006 to return to Israel. And I knew that God wanted me back in Israel. I was not broken up about it. It wasn't hard for me. I was excited. But if I had not given my life to the Lord, I don't think I would have been. But I received letters from the kids in my school, some of them who were believers. I got some letters, some goodbye letters. And some of them said, 2 weeks had passed. And they said, in the last few weeks that we've known you, you are not the same person we've known for 5 years. You are not the same person. All it took was a few weeks. They said, we don't know who you are, but something happened to you. And so I believe in the power of a moment to transform a person's life. And all it takes is that one moment where God meets that person and their life is changed forever. And it changes the trajectory of where they're headed as a person, as either a believer, a person, a human being, or a disciple of Yeshua when they encounter his love. And we've seen this over and over in our youth camps. Last year, there was probably about 50 plus teenagers who gave their life or rededicated their life to the Lord during our camps. Our camps serve mostly the body of Messiah in Israel. They exist to strengthen the body of Messiah in Israel, which is small, still a relatively small body. Okay, less than 30,000, maybe even less than 25,000 believers. We're less than 0.5% of the population in Israel, which causes a lot of challenges for the teenagers in Israel and for the next generation. One of them is the military, as Michael was saying. They have to serve in the military. And many of my friends who I grew up with as believers in youth groups and youth camps, many of them have left the faith during the military service. It's a very challenging time for believers where they're isolated and a lot of peer pressure where they're at. And so the camps are an opportunity to help prepare them for what's to come, but also to help equip them to walk with the Lord in the midst of their daily struggles going to high school in Israeli society. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what a normal teenager faces in Israel is, they grew up in a system where one is, there's very few of you. You're less, in a school, in any given school, you're lucky if there's 3 or 4 believers in that school. You're lucky, all right? I had friends who were alone in that school the whole time that they were in school. They were the only believers there. And so even if you have a few kids in your school who are believers, most of the time you're isolated and you're alone. So you're not in a place where there's other believers to really encourage you to walk with the Lord in the midst of a very secular and peer pressure driven society. The second thing that they grow up with is identity issues, because we're Jewish people who believe in the Messiah, in Yeshua, but we maintain that we are Jewish. But the society around them tells them over and over that they are not, that you cannot be Jewish and believe in Yeshua, that you cannot be Israeli and believe in this Christian thing in Jesus. And so they're faced with this identity crisis of how can I be Jewish, but more than being Jewish, I want to fit in. I want to be Israeli. I want to be one of the people here in the land of Israel with my friends who are Israeli. And so you want to fit in and feel like you're a part of the people, a part of a group. But sometimes it will look at you as an outsider if you believe in Yeshua. You're not like us. You don't believe like us. You believe something that's foreign, and you've lost your identity. That's what most of society believes. Now, most of them have good friends in high school. Most of them are secular. They don't care. You can believe whatever you want. But there's still that hindrance of, well, you can believe whatever you want, but you can never really believe in Yeshua because that's different. That's not allowed. And so they're faced with all of these floods of messages from their surrounding, from society, from the government, about who they are, about what they're supposed to or not supposed to believe. And they have to decide what it is that I believe. What is it that I believe is true? What is God telling me? In each of our camps, we see this reality expressed in a very real way, where we have about 120 teens. All of them come from a believing background. Parents who are believers, grew up in a Messianic congregation, most of them. But we always see this division. There's a third of them that are believers. They've chosen to walk with the Lord. They've chosen this is what they want to believe. A third of them are on the, what do you call it, like on the fence. Yeah, they're on the fence. They're not sure. They're trying to make up their minds. And a third of them have already rejected it. They've said, we're not interested in this. Okay, so each camp, we have these three groups of teenagers that we're trying to reach all of them. And we understand they're all in a conflict, something they're dealing with. The camps also present an opportunity for the teenagers to experience healing, deep healing. Sometimes things that they don't talk about in the congregations, things that are not brought up. Each camp, we discover more and more people who have experienced family violence, sexual abuse, depression and suicidal tendencies or struggles. Our last camp in Passover, we had a young girl at the end of the camp talk about how she had dealt with depression and tried to kill herself 2 weeks before the camp. And nobody knew. And her youth leaders were there. And they were shocked. They didn't know. And we're able to help just allow them a place of safety where things can be brought up and be exposed so that they can be dealt with. And then when things like this are brought up, we turn them to professional help. We don't try to deal with that on our own. We're not equipped to do that. I'm not a therapist. So we get them the help they need. But it helps bring those things up. And each camp, we see this over and over. Now, especially after COVID, we see many more teenagers dealing with issues of anxiety, depression, what's called social anxiety, the inability to be around large groups of people or friends. They get very scared. They start having panic attacks. We've been having lots of teens who get panic attacks because of that anxiety. So these camps are a major opportunity to deeply impact their lives in a very real way by presenting them the gospel, by presenting them an opportunity to meet God, by presenting them an opportunity to encourage their faith through positive peer pressure. Many other believers their age who are walking with the Lord so that they can be encouraged that they're not alone. This is a very important reality of teenagers. They need that they need to feel like they're part of a group. And the group that they connect with is how they will define themselves. And so giving them positive peer pressure is very important. Being with other believers their age. When I was 18, I was attending the Katsir camp that what Eitan shared about. And we were in a youth camp. The camp at the time was Passover 2008, was in a desert. We were in a Bedouin tent. And I was deeply wounded. I grew up in a family that was broken. My dad was an alcoholic. I experienced a lot of violence in the family as a young child. And I had a lot of trauma. I had a lot of hurt, and I hated my dad. I deeply hated my dad. I was really bound by that hatred. And at this camp, I remember it was the first time I brought it up to somebody, to one of the other leaders who was there. And I just shared with them about how I felt. And they encouraged me to ask the Lord for help and that I couldn't continue like this, that you wouldn't head anywhere good if you continue on this path. And I didn't really have anything else to do other than finally exposing it, talking with somebody about it. I'd never talked to anybody outside the family about it. And finally just bringing it out And after we spoke, we started the worship service. And during the worship time, I just told the Lord, I can't forgive. I want to forgive, but I can't, and I need your help. And God just met me in that moment. And I just fell on the floor and just started yelling. I mean, I can't even explain what happened. And I was just weeping on the floor. And all of that hatred just started to come out. And I experienced a deep deliverance in my own heart where I was able to finally say, okay, I'm willing to forgive. Now, that wasn't the end of the journey. That was the beginning. It was the journey of a few years of walking that out, learning how to forgive. I still need to forgive all the time. You know, memories are not erased. You still have to deal with them on a weekly basis sometimes. But I had to choose to walk in that forgiveness, and that was the beginning point of transformation for me. So again, I gave my life to the Lord in a youth camp. I found healing in a youth camp. And so I believe in what we're doing because I've experienced it. And I've been involved now with Katsir for about, since 2006. So how long is that? 13 years now. And I'm now the director of the youth camps as well as the executive director of the ministry. And just quickly before I finish, I want to share about what we're wanting to do moving forward. So the youth camps have been running for 22 years. This is an established ministry that's not going anywhere, but we want to keep growing as a ministry. And what the Lord has put on our heart is two things. One is we want to equip young adults. We want to disciple young adults, Jews and Arabs together. That's something that the Lord gave me a heart for. Up until about 2014, I was unwilling to work with Arabs. I hated Arab people. I had different issues. I was attacked by Arabs in 2012. I needed 20-something stitches in my head. And the Lord helped me also to walk through forgiveness towards the Arab people and gave me a passion for not just reconciliation, but moving into partnership and cooperation of building the kingdom together as Jews and Arabs in the land of Israel. And so part of what we want to do is to help equip young people to walk in that, to be able to live and learn and grow spiritually together as Jews and Arabs and find the ability to walk and cooperate and work together with common goals, shared goals, which is building the kingdom of God together in the land of Israel. So that's one of the things we're working towards doing. In the picture, it won't be in the video, but in the picture on the brochure, one of the young men of our team, he's an Arab believer who joined our team a year ago, and he's a part of helping us establish that. And the other thing that this young man is doing is he's working to establish the same thing that we're doing in Hebrew, the Katsir youth camps, which Katsir means harvest in Hebrew. He's working to establish the kind of a twin, how would you call it, a twin camp, same idea, same vision, but in Arabic for Arab teens. Because at the moment, Arab teens have almost nothing in the land of Israel, nothing. And I was with an Arab pastor at the airport just a few days ago, and we agreed that there's only one ministry that we know of that does one youth camp a year for Arab teens. That's all there is. And he tells me that the Arab churches, and they admit it openly, they're in a crisis with the teens. They are not in the church. They're not in the congregations. We visited several the last few weeks. They all tell me the same. They are not in the congregations. The teens do not attend. The parents don't even try to bring them. They're not in the congregations, and they are in a crisis with the next generation in the Arab, you call it the Arab sector or the Arab church. And so this young man has a deep passion to see what God is doing among the Jewish teens. He wants the same for Arab teens, an opportunity to meet God and to experience transformation. And that through that, we can help encourage the Arab churches by helping the Arab teens be on fire for the Lord, receive the Lord, and maybe plug back into the churches where they need to be, but they're not at the moment. And we really feel the need to serve the Arab churches by serving the next generation like we do on the Jewish side as well. So this is a developing and very important part of our ministry that I believe in. I believe in the uniqueness of what we're trying to do, in that we're really wanting to serve Jews and Arabs together, not just Jewish people, and not just Jewish people and invite Arabs to participate, but we want to serve Jews and Arabs in their context, in their language, and allow them to do things how they need to be done for their people, but to serve them as Jews, to say, we're going to serve you and give you the ability to do this, and we're going to support it. We're going to be a part of it, but it's going to be in Arabic, and it's going to be for Arab teens. It's not going to be led by us, but it's for you guys, and we want to encourage and serve you in that way. So this is a very integral and new part of our ministry that I really believe in. I'm going to close with that. We're going to show you real quick the video of our ministry, and then if you need to go, if you have time constraints and you need to go, please feel free. We will not be offended. But if you want to stay, we will have a time of Q&A, and we'll just receive questions and answers, and you can feel free to ask questions about anything that's on your heart, whether it's politics or ministry, spiritual, whatever, questions about the Bible, about Israel, about the Jewish people, things that you may have on your heart that you're like, I'm really curious to know what they think or what they say about this, will be available. I don't know how long we'll give to it. We'll kind of go it, see how it flows. But if you need to go again, feel free. We will not be offended. All right, so let's show the video.
Yeshua said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." In the midst of Israel's unique tensions, there is an intense spiritual hunger. How will the Jewish and Arab peoples come to know the Messiah and new faith communities be planted? The key is investing in the next generation as messengers and future leaders who will be trained and sent out. With more than 20 years' experience working with youth and young adults, Fields of Wheat is poised to meet this urgent need in three main ways. First, Katsir youth camps. Second, our Harvesters Discipleship Program. And third, the Fields of Wheat Equipping Center, which will provide a permanent home for these ministries and to host local congregations for their special activities.
Through multiple camps each year, our teens get to experience the presence of God in worship, in His Word, and in much needed fellowship. Thousands of teens have been impacted through this camp. My own life was transformed when the Lord set me free from bitterness and unforgiveness. Many more teens await this opportunity.
I like coming to Katsir conferences because it helps build your faith and grow.
What I like about the small groups is that you get to be more vulnerable and you can share your thoughts.
I grew up in Katsir from the age of 13. My first time being there was the biggest change I can imagine. God really talked to me about worship.
I believe that as other counselors when I was younger helped me encounter God, I can help and bless others to do the same.
Right here is where Yeshua called His very first disciples to follow Him, and that calling is still happening today. We have a passion to disciple young adults, preparing them to live wholeheartedly for the Lord. Growing up in Israel, I've personally tasted the unique challenges that young believers experience. This is why we are establishing the Harvesters Discipleship Experience. Here, Jewish and Arab believers can grow together in their faith, living as one family without the wall of separation. This is a demonstration of Yeshua's kingdom that our region desperately needs.
These disciples will be trained for a life of intimacy with the Lord, servant leadership, learning to cooperate by working the land together, and by taking our teams into the nations.
Where can we create a home for Fields of Wheat? We're moving forward to equip the next generation. We're not waiting for a permanent place. Yet we believe that the best fruit will come from our own facility in the open spaces of northern Israel. Here, youth, young adults, and local congregations can grow, being empowered by the Word of God and His Spirit for works of love.
I believe, first of all, with this vision, because we are Arab believer and Messianic Jewish believers, and Jesus, he removed the wall between us and they gave us to be one.
We've shared the Fields of Wheat vision with you. Now, with open hearts, we invite you to be part of this story by sowing financial seed into the Lord's harvest. Thank you for joining us in this end time calling.
Thank you. Can I just add something, Michael?
You can always ask.
Since this film was made, the Lord has provided us with a facility. It's a modest one, and we are believing that ultimately there will be something of a larger, greater ability to serve. But for now, it is an amazing, large home in the Golan Heights. If you know Israel at all, it's a town called Katzrin, which interestingly is the same root as the word katsir, harvest, because it was an ancient center for growing wheat. Very interesting. And that's where our discipleship will be. So I just wanted to share that with you as a testimony. Secondly, I wanted to say that when Joel was talking about this issue of serving our Arab brothers and sisters, you will remember that there was an incredible moment when Jacob, having been afraid of the attack of Esau and his men around Genesis chapter 33, had an encounter, I believe it was with a pre-incarnation Yeshua, in which he touches his hip, he's limping, he realizes his dependence. And when he goes to meet Esau, he bows before him 7 times. There is something in that principle that God showed me, that as we humble ourselves toward our Arab brothers and sisters, there's going to be a healing, because that's part of what is necessary. I want to encourage you to visit the book table afterwards, both to grab a pamphlet, as Joel mentioned, but also I've written a couple of books. The first one is about our relationship. The Lord showed me a paradigm between 2 kings, King Solomon and King Hiram, who in 1 Kings 5 and 2 Chronicles 2 combine their abilities, their giftings, their callings, their cultures, their backgrounds to build the initial temple in Jerusalem. And what I felt God showing me was that it will not be until we, as Jewish and Gentile followers of Jesus, are putting our lives and our giftings together in a kind of a covenant love. It actually says in that passage that Hiram always loved David. I don't think that's an unusual way to speak about ancient kings. But the bottom line here is that the temple was the landing strip for God's glory. This is not a small goal, beloved. Yes, we're talking about camps for teenagers, and we're talking about discipling young adults, and those are tools, those are means. But I believe the end that God has called us to is to create the atmosphere into which Yeshua can return. And on that note, I just want to conclude with this. In the 2nd chapter of the book of Joel, you're familiar with it, God says he's going to pour out his Spirit on all flesh, that's all of us. And then he says, your sons and daughters, speaking to Israel, will prophesy. There is something of a key to seeing the next generation of Israelis anointed with God's Spirit and prepared to be used in the return of the Lord, which that same passage keys to our physical return to Israel. We love you and appreciate you very much. We're going to take some questions.
Good. By all means. I want to take a moment just to share that I am on the American Board of Directors for Fields of Wheat. Yes, sir. A founding board member. And this is a vision that's huge. The reason we keep talking about 120 youth is because all the facility we can find can handle 120 youth, and our budget allows for 120 youth. These are subsidized camps. And our vision is much bigger, and we have I think the last count was over 180 applications to come to the camp, and all we could accept was 120. But the vision is bigger. And we promised you in the invitation we would not receive an offering today, but we are receiving a relationship. And each of you has a sphere of influence. You may be a pastor, and your sphere of influence is your church. You may have friends. You may have friends.
We know you do.
And it's just a left-handed compliment. But yeah, we know you do. I stand corrected. But your friends could be a sphere of influence to where you can say, I met these guys. I invite you to get to know these guys. These guys can be your guys by the hand of God. God's kingdom is really made up of relationships. And we are one body, and one body knows each other through relationship. So, Mike Hamoudi, you did well. Joel, you're not Mike Hamoudi, you still did well.
You gathered a good crowd, Rabbi. I think it was a setup.
It was a setup. So how about some questions, Q&A, answers, questions? Anyone at all? Okay, Ray.
Hey, I just want to say the organic, highlight that.
Bring the microphone to them so people don't mind.
Yeah, all right. I just want to echo what they said about the organic, the relationship factor. Eitan was one of the first people that Catherine and I met when we went to the land in 2014. It was a late evening. We were on a tour. It was our first time there. And I think we were all tired, and he had to be tired. But Eitan took such time with us, kicked back in a hotel, and won our hearts by relationship. So, no, don't take my mic yet. And even kind of fast forwarding in recent years, we were in some subject and we were texting back and forth, and I'm thinking, okay, we'll try to send him a text. Send a guy in Israel a text that's as busy as Eitan, and we get a reply like within 30 seconds. So just to highlight the beauty of something more than, just supporting a ministry that's distant from you. But it really is about relationship. And I just had one question. Would you, you didn't address it in specifics, but Eitan, after you guys got firebombed, something significant happened that has some real meaning between Jew and Gentile. Would you just share that?
The firebombing took place 2 years after we opened our congregation. We were using a warehouse, and not more than about 100 yards from that warehouse was a spec construction. It was an industrial building that actually didn't have any tenants yet. And we were praying hard for a larger facility because we'd outgrown this warehouse that we rented. The firebombing happened, and people began to contact us from around the world and to say, we're praying for you. Some people were sending offerings. I found myself one day up on Mount Carmel at another congregation, and a woman said, are you Eitan Shishkoff? I said, yes. She said, well, the Lord instructed me to give this to you, and she's writing on a check. She hands me a check for $40,000. I never met the woman in my life. That enabled us to get our feet in the door of that very new building, the industrial building 100 yards from where the firebombing happened. We've always been tempted to create a plaque and put it on the side of the wall to thank the ultra-Orthodox who were trying to scare us away. And I think that maybe a conclusion to this little story is that whereas at that time the city where we live, which is called Kiryat Yam, the city by the sea, said nothing. Nobody came by say, we're really sorry for what happened. You guys are nice guys. Nobody said anything.
Investigating.
Yeah, it was too costly politically because they knew that we were Messianic Jews. But fast forward, my son-in-law, who's an Ethiopian Jew and is now leading the congregation, is now pursued by several city governments in relationship to humanitarian aid because of the reputation that we've developed since we gained the access to that larger building, which we now have warehouse space. I mean, before we were functioning out of little cardboard boxes, and now we're functioning out of warehouse space where we need a forklift. So thank you for the question, Ray.
You know, there was a time, I don't think you mentioned, but we paid cash for the house in Katsrin, yes, in the Golan. Yes. And that cash is an answer to what something I heard as a board member: do what you can with what you've got. And so this facility that we have is a start, but the vision is much larger.
Amen. There's actually a picture of it in this little pamphlet that we want all of you to take. In fact, I'm going to be bold and bring those pamphlets in so that everybody gets one.
All right. Any other questions you may have about Israel? Anything else that you may want to ask? Now is the chance. You have two guys here from Israel. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious to know what it cost for the camps.
For who? For the teens or for us?
For the teens.
For the teens. So the teens cover a third of the real cost. They're not aware of the real cost, but they pay 100 shekels for each day of the camp. So if it's a 4-day camp, they pay actually a little bit less. They pay 350 shekels. For the summer camp, they pay 500. There's quite a few teens who are not even able to pay that, and so we tell them, you know, we already subsidize what we can. You need to get help from your congregation or other youth groups that help them subsidize what they can't pay. So they pay a third, and then we cover the 2/3 of the cost that they don't cover. So each camp usually comes out to about the real cost of a specific camp is about $35,000, but that doesn't include administrative salaries of people who are involved with all the months of planning that it takes ahead of time.
That's for 120 people.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not 120 people, it's 120 teens.
120 teens.
We have a team of about 40 people who serve the camp.
Right.
And so usually each camp is about 160 people.
Okay.
Altogether, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And as Michael was saying, you know, we have a lot of teens who sign up who can't come because we don't have the space. It's not just an issue of space. The space is a real issue. Like we cram into these small halls that are only supposed to host about 100 people inside. So sometimes it's a fire code violation. We're not even supposed to be doing it. But we cram, 140, 150, 160 people into a hall because that's what there is. And the bigger hotel, we're not looking for conference halls and hotel facilities. We're staying usually at youth hostels that are, they give special youth prices for high school students because that's what they're purposed for. They belong to the government for that specific purpose. And that's the facility that they have, and so that's what we use, and it's a price that we can make the camps more affordable and realistic. But one of the finer points is that our camps were not looking to be large. We could easily grow to 250, 300 teens if we changed the vision and the way we do the camps. But the camps are based around the foundation of small group discipleship. So each 6 to 7 teenagers have a personal counselor in charge of that group, and they meet each day to do devotional times together. And then throughout the day, the leader is in charge of getting to know the teenagers in his group, spending time with them and praying for them, and then also praying for them after the messages. If we have ministry time, they're responsible to pray for the teens in their group. And it's that small group that allows for a very deep level of openness, because it's not just 1 or 2 days, it's 3 or 4 days. And the first day, they're not that open. The second day, they're not that open. But you get to the 3rd and 4th day, and they're very open. And they begin to feel very comfortable with their leaders because they spend time together. They've gotten to know them. and they start to bring up deep things or things that are happening in their life that they don't bring up in other places. And so it's this process that they go through in the context of a small group and personal leaders that allows us to have great fruit and impact in their lives. And so we're always aiming for quality over quantity. And in order to have that quality, you need young adults. And so if we were to grow the camps to a level where each small group has to be 10 teens, then you don't get the quality because the leader cannot get to know 10 teenagers in 4 days. And so we're trying to maintain a balance between, yes, we want to serve more teenagers, but we also want to keep and sustain the quality of the camps with the personal relationship between the counselors and the teenagers. And we'll go to you next.
House the Golan, is someone living there?
Yeah,
A couple?
our team member, Ruby, our Arab team member, is living there.
And then that's where they go daily for workshops or the discipleship there?
No, so that house is going to be serving more of discipleship, and it serves our team. I live just a street over from the house, and so we meet there as a team. We have our staff meetings. We work from there. We have an office there, but it's not. It's a house with 4 bedrooms. It's not for teen camps or things like that. This is meant for. We've done like brunches. Small group equipping, so 25 to 30 people at the most. It's in a residential neighborhood area. You know, you can't bring, like we had 2 tour groups who wanted to come on a bus, you know, with 50 people, and we said we can't do that. We have neighbors. We can't have 50 people here. It's going to cause too much of a stir. We have to be careful. So it's more for small groups, 20, 25, 30 people at the most, and mostly for young adults. So we're going to be doing the discipleship there. We host people once in a while. We gather people there, but it's small.
Our counseling team, it's ideal to have retreats with them, so it
Yeah.
works very well for that.
I wondered what the neighborhood thought, and also the other thing is the Arab community. Have you had backlash from intersecting Jewish and Arab teens?
In terms of backlash, so far no, but we're always on the lookout for it. So, that's why we're taking things very slowly. Ruby has been on our team for a year now, and our goal is to try to launch an Arab camp next year, early next year, but it's not set in stone because all of it is dependent on relationships and the response from Arab young adults and Arab leaders. We have a few Arab leaders who are on board with us. They see the need, but he's working and we're working still to build trust and relationship with Arab leadership. It's sensitive. It is sensitive. I will say that because Ruby's parents, or not his parents, his mom's family were pastors in Nazareth. So I think it was his uncle. He was one of the most known pastors in the Baptist denomination in Israel. He was a pastor for 60 years. So everybody there knows his family. Everyone. If you say anything about the family name, like everybody knows it. It's a very well-respected family. And for them to say that they won't work with him would be very shameful with their family history. So that gives us a little bit of a open door, or at least it keeps a foot in the door that they can't close it. But yes, it's a very sensitive area, and we're walking very slowly so that we don't burn ourselves in front of the Arab leaders. That we have, once they say no, there's no going back. Like if they say we will not work with you, nobody will work with you. And this has happened to another ministry who was looking to do the same thing. They wanted to do Arab camps that will serve Arab teens. And one of the main leaders of the Arab churches in Israel wrote a letter, pretty much, how do you say, lachrim otam? How do you say lachrim?
I'm looking for it.
Blackballed them, you know, do not send anybody to work with them. And that's it. The door was closed and the vision was dead, and they couldn't continue doing what they wanted to do, and it's never gotten off the ground since. But one of the reasons that they were blackballed is because this is a ministry, it's called Netiva, that they also do soldiers camps, they work with soldiers, they have retreats that are like 2-week preparation times for seniors in high school when they finish. They do a 2-week retreat to prepare them for the army. It's called Netzor. And so because of their work with soldiers for the Arab people, specifically these Arab leaders, that was too much. They couldn't handle that. They said, if you're working with soldiers, you're against us. Like, we cannot support that. Have nothing to do. You cannot have anything to do with a ministry that works with soldiers. And that was their issue. So we're not really working with soldiers. We have soldiers that come and serve in our camps at times, but that's not, at this moment, that's not the goal of our ministry, because there's another ministry that's already doing that very well. Our goal is to work with post-army believers. When they get out of the army, they need a lot of restoration, investment, deepening and strengthening their walk with the Lord, receiving healing from hatred towards Arabs, because you get filled with that in the army, because that's what you're inundated with, messages about the Arabs and hatred towards Arabs. That's where my heart turned against the Arabs. And so there's a lot of ground to work with when they get out of the army. But our work specifically is not with soldiers, and so that's one less landmine that we have to deal with in terms of working with Arabs. It's a very sensitive area. There's a lot of nuances to it. I don't want to get into all of it.
I have a couple of comments, Catherine. One is, in terms of the neighborhood, please be praying, because as Joel was sharing earlier about kids in schools, people do not understand who we are. So if the first thing they hear about us is we're Messianic Jews, that's already kind of a red flag. And there are a number of what I would call modern Orthodox people who are observant in their Judaism in that neighborhood. So we really want to lead with a gentle and a serving foot. And a lot of it's going to be, just in one-on-one conversation. Joel already had a conversation with one of the neighbors. They were comparing us to another ministry that they called the Hallelujahs, because it was a rather bold ministry. So we could use prayer for those relationships. We obviously want those to be of quality. And the second thing for prayer is that although there isn't really that much of a backlash, there has been some pushback, because when we first started the ministry, we weren't really talking about this Arab-Jewish discipleship. It was pretty much on a clear Messianic Jewish direction. I feel very strongly that what Joel has brought in to the reality of Fields of Wheat is absolutely from the Lord. It's something that I've wanted to be involved with for a long time. But there's some pushback from the Jewish side. So we could use prayer for that, because we want to come through this and have real unity about that.
If more people need to leave, before you leave, I just want to say this. If you're a leader of a ministry or church, if you're a pastor, and you would like to get to know us better, you want to have time with us, get to know us a little bit better, we're here until Sunday. We have tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday here, and we're available to meet for coffee, for a meal, if you would like to know more about who we are, our ministry, and you want to have some more time with us. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's so fun, excuse me, being Michael's wife, because I get the last say. I asked him if it's okay if I love the Hebrew language, and I would love for you two just to speak to each other in Hebrew for just a second before we end.
First of all, the word that...
And then tell us what you said.
All right. The word, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was a resh in there, right? Leachrim?
Leachrim, yeah.
Okay, so it means to create a ban, that something will be banned. The noun from it is cherem, which is, it means there's a ban on it. קודם כל, אני פשוט שמח שהגעת לפה.
תודה רבה, מעריך את זה.
I'm really happy that you got here, and he says, I appreciate that.
When it's like when they ask me to speak in Spanish, and your mind just goes blank, and you're like, wait, what am I supposed to say? Wait. הבריסקט היה מאוד טעים. You have to say with that accent.
אחת הסיבות שאני כל כך שמח שהגעת זה שלמרות שאני מרגיש צעיר בליבי, הגוף שלי לא משתתף כמו שצריך.
So he said, one of the reasons, do you want me to translate?
Go ahead.
He said, one of the reasons I'm happy that you are here with me is because although I feel young at heart, my body does not agree with it, or
it's not cooperating.
Not cooperating. Yeah. All right. I guess we're going to close up. If you have any more questions, we're going to be here a little bit to chat and and talk, you can feel free to approach us.
You've got Connie's artwork out on the table?
I'm going to go out there and
You're gonna-
host the table.
Not yet.
Not yet?
No, I want to pray over you both.
All right, thank you.
And thank you for being here. If you're interested, they'll both be back here Saturday morning to minister during our worship service together. And I hope you will take time, if you haven't already said hi to Eitan and Joel, please let them know. So when you hear from them in the future and they hear from you in the future, there'll be a name and a face.
Which, by the way, we hope that you are okay with this. We're taking the liberty to begin sending your updates because Rabbi Michael is providing us with your email addresses. If that's problematic, let us know.
You can always click unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe.
Yeah. But Father, I just ask for your continued anointing on these dear brothers. May they be refreshed and restored and renewed. As they have poured their hearts out to us today, we receive with thanksgiving from your throne of grace. And we ask that you pour out grace, power from on high to restore and renew in Yeshua's name. Amen. Amen. Blessings to you both.
Toda rabah. Thank you all.